And welcome to the briefing room. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington, joined by Jordan Phelps, our White House reporter. Thank you for joining us here on this very busy Tuesday as the nation's capital continues to mourn the loss of George Herbert Walker Bush. We have live picture right now of mourners continuing to pay their respects inside the U.S. Capitol Dome. We've seen the lines long over the past 24 hours continuing to build. The president will lie in state there at the Capitol Rotunda until tomorrow. That's when the proceedings will move to the National Cathedral, where we'll have the funeral service with dozens of world leaders and all living former American presidents will be there as well. And just some stunning images, very moving tributes to the president from today's ceremonies and proceedings at the Capitol, including this one by former Republican Senate Majority Leader during Bush administration, also one-time presidential candidate Bob Dole, who was wheeled in. You can see Bob Dole quite infirm now, but still sharp of mind, with the help of an aide, as you'll see here, standing to salute the former president. Quite something to see. Very moving moment. Of course, Bob Dole, one of the greatest generation as well from that World War II era and a war hero. Bob Dole saluting President George Herbert Walker Bush. And ABC's Kenneth Moulton has been covering all of the activity today on Capitol Hill. Kenneth, give us a sense of the state of play right now. What have you been hearing and seeing as people come to pay their respects?
Devin, has really been remarkable here on Capitol Hill. I was able to make my way inside the Capitol Rotunda. People from all over the country, from different walks of life, families with their teenagers, with their small children, paying their respects to the 41st President of the United States. I will say that it's incredible a number of times because it's just remarkable to go in there and to see all of those people, also from different political backgrounds, really coming together to unite, to really salute this man, because they're choosing to focus not on George H.W. Bush's politics, but his life of service. Also today, I want to bring up that moment again, Devin, that you mentioned just right at the top, of Bob Dole, this former Republican primary presidential opponent of H.W. Bush, where we know in 1988 they battled it out for that Republican nomination. Obviously, we know that it was George H.W. Bush who won out, but there, his former opponent, later his friend, a dear friend, who stood there with the help of an aide and was able to salute his president. We saw other touching and incredible moments here on Capitol Hill as well. Sully, you've heard us talk about Sully over the past couple of days, that service dog, that four-legged friend of Bush 41. Well, he was back there next to that casket by his former owner's side. We've seen Colin Powell also here on Capitol Hill, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under Bush 41, former Secretary of State under George W. Bush, who was able to salute the president as well. Former personal aides from over the years. And then also another moment that I want to bring up, which was Neil Bush, the president's son, who is now the chairman of that Points of Life Foundation. Remember, that nonprofit organization started because of the call for service, the call to action to serve others from Bush 41. That nonprofit was created from that policy. And so we've seen Neil Bush, who led those members of the organization in. We've seen so many people joining those everyday Americans to salute Bush 41.
All right, Kenneth Moulton for us at the Capitol. Kenneth, thank you so much for your reporting there. And Jordan, I've been struck by, among those mourners and those paying respects, President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump really doing what one would expect presidents to do. I guess that shouldn't be that extraordinary, but we know in light of the history this president has had with the Bushes, to see him last night salute the former president who voted for Hillary Clinton just struck me as quite something to see.
Definitely, Devin, the president and the first lady making that special visit up to Capitol Hill last night to pay their respects. And as you note, the president is really checking all the boxes that you'd expect a president to check in a case like this. You, of course, remember the 2016 campaign. There was a lot of bad blood between the Bushes and President Trump. But what's really going on here, Devin, it really speaks to the kind of man that George H.W. Bush was in life, and he's continuing in death. We know that the Bush team has been in close contact with the White House going back months, planning for the eventual funeral
so
that
this was
they knew
no
was
accident.
coming.
They wanted to bring President Trump into the fold here.
Absolutely. The Bushes sort of offered an olive branch here and brought the White House into the planning process for this. The Trump White House clearly accepted that, and that's why you're seeing so much precision in the execution of this event, because this isn't something that's just come together since Friday. It's been months in the making.
And no doubt a little bit of pragmatism, too, from the Bush family. They wanted their father to be treated in this way. They didn't want to spoil that by the bad blood, as you say, so they sort of did that olive branch. But also, it's fascinating to see the President Trump. One wonders if he's reflecting on the treatment he might receive when one day he will pass and may lay in state and could get similar treatment. Very interesting to watch, Jordan. Thank you for that reporting. Meanwhile, the Capitol is actually quite busy today on another matter of significance, that being the death of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi. The CIA director today, Gina Haspel, has been up on Capitol Hill briefing key senators on her findings in that case. As we know, Gina Haspel, a key figure, she went to Turkey to hear that alleged audio tape of the murder itself. And what we heard from senators coming out of that briefing has been quite something. Let's bring in Mary Bruce, our senior congressional correspondent. Mary, what have you been hearing from lawmakers emerging, and what are they talking about doing now when it comes to Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, Devin, it's been really remarkable, actually. You've seen members of Congress, leaders from both parties coming out of this briefing in agreement that they feel stronger than ever now after having heard from the CIA director in person that the Saudi crown prince was, in fact, complicit in the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. They are fired up and furious about this. You heard what amounted to really just jaw-dropping statements of condemnation from Republicans coming out of this briefing. Bob Corker, the top Republican on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, saying that there is zero question in his mind that the Saudi crown prince ordered this killing, monitored the killing, knew exactly what was happening. He said that if the crown prince was in front of a jury, he would be convicted of murder in less than 30 minutes. And then you heard from Lindsey Graham, of course, who is an ally of President Trump up here on the Hill, coming out and saying that there's not a smoking gun, there's a smoking saw. Really remarkable to hear him coming out so forcefully. And this really puts a lot of pressure on President Trump because, of course, the president has insisted that there is no direct link between the Saudi crown prince and this killing. He said, look, maybe he knew about it, maybe he didn't. Lawmakers up here clearly disagree. So then the question is, well, what are they going to do about it? There is a resolution that they could take action on that would lead the U.S. to withdraw its support for the Saudi-led war in Yemen. It is not clear at this point whether they will or how they will move forward with that resolution. Graham has said that he also wants to take what would amount to a symbolic step to condemn the Saudi crown prince for what he believes is his involvement in this. But it's a real riff. You have which is pretty rare up here these days, to see Republicans come out and so forcefully disagree with the Trump administration. Now the question is, how will they follow up?
Yeah, Bob Corker, one of the most outspoken critics of Trump on foreign policy. Lindsey Graham has been a persistent critic, but also a very close ally of President Trump. To see him speak out on this was something. Let's actually take a listen to what both men had to say when they came out of that meeting. Take a listen.
There's not a smoking gun, there's a smoking saw. You have to be willfully blind not to come to the conclusion that this was orchestrated and organized by people under the command of MBS, and that he was intricately involved in the demise of Mr. Khashoggi. I will not look at the kingdom the same way that I used to look at it.
If the crown prince went in front of a jury, he would be convicted in 30 minutes.
Of murder?
Yes.
So that after that briefing with Gina Haspel, Mary, but I just want to play for you what the Secretary of State said just 2 days ago. He said he was briefed by the same CIA intelligence officers, and he drew a very different conclusion. Listen to Mike Pompeo.
I have read every piece of intelligence that is in the possession of the United States government, and when it is done, when you complete that analysis, there's no direct evidence linking him to the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. That is an accurate statement, is an important statement, and it is the statement that we are making publicly today.
So Mike Pompeo there, Mary, saying he saw the evidence. There was no smoking gun, and then here you got Lindsey Graham saying there is a smoking saw.
Yeah, we have a very clear and dramatic difference of opinion here. And remember, the members of Congress were briefed by Pompeo several days ago, but they wanted to hear directly from the CIA director because, of course, her agency had reportedly drawn this conclusion that the Crown Prince was directly linked to this murder. It's also part of the reason that you're seeing calls from top leaders here on the Senate for the entire Senate to be briefed by Gina Haspel, the CIA director. What occurred today was a briefing just by top leaders of both parties, members of key committees or chairmen from key committees, but Senate Democrats in particular want Gina Haspel to come up and brief every single senator so that everyone is getting the same information because right now only certain people have received this briefing. But yeah, it is interesting to see, you have this rift between the president's top cabinet secretaries like Pompeo, the president himself, and what clearly is the conclusion of the CIA director, which has now been shared with these lawmakers.
And Mary, before we let you go, we need to check in on that government funding fight. The shutdown averted for now, at least this week, while the Capitol mourns George Herbert Walker Bush. But you're really digging into the weeds on the single sticking point here, and that is the president's border wall. Where does that stand? That's the only issue, right?
It's the same sticking point that's been the sticking point for the last couple times that we've had a shutdown fight. It's beginning to feel a little bit like Groundhog Day up here. As we talk about these funding fights, it all comes down to the president's wall. The president wants, we know, $5 billion for his wall. Some Republicans back up that belief. Senate Democrats on both sides, in both chambers, are willing to offer $1.6 billion. That would go towards, towards border security, things like drones, more assistance down on the border, and fencing. That's a far cry from the brick and mortar wall that the president has so famously promised his supporters. And how the two are going to bridge that gap remains to be seen. But the clock, Devin, is really ticking here because this week they're going to act to kick the can down the road another 2 weeks. Both parties knew that as the country is mourning the loss of President Bush, someone known for his bipartisanship, to be mourning that loss with a bitter partisan fight is not good optics for the Hill or for the country. So they're buying themselves another 2 weeks. But that sets up a Christmas shutdown showdown on December 21st. They have 2 weeks now to figure this out. But it's hard to see right now from talking to leaders on both sides of the aisle how they're going to get the president that $5 billion that they want. And of course, if they don't, and we do see a shutdown, that would be a partial shutdown. But again, then the clock is ticking as the new Congress comes in, and then Democrats will be in power over in the House.
All right, we're in crunch time here in Washington, and Mary Bruce is on the beat all the way through to the finish line. Mary Bruce, senior congressional correspondent, thank you so much. Meanwhile, another major development today on the front of foreign affairs, this one involving Russia. Let's go over to the State Department now, where our Connor Finnegan has been reporting on this today. The Secretary of State making an announcement just a short time ago, Connor, that the U.S. is actually going to make good on that promise to pull out of the INF treaty with Russia. This is a nuclear forces treaty dating to the Cold War. Tell us what it means.
It means that in a few months down the road from now, the U.S. will officially withdraw from this really landmark nuclear deal. As you said, it was one of the most important agreements at the end of the Cold War, and it helped to reduce nuclear tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union. But what Secretary Pompeo announced today is that they are giving Russia 60 more days before they officially begin this wind down period of 6 months. So they have until then to really either get in compliance or get in the room with the Trump administration and try to negotiate some sort of resolution. The administration has consistently said that Russia is in violation of the INF treaty. It's something that goes back to the Obama administration as well because of their development and deployment of a missile system, something that NATO said today threatens European security. Whether or not Russia is willing to do that remains unclear. As Secretary Pompeo said today, they've given no indication that they're willing to do so.
No indication they're willing to do so, and yet they do have 60 days, though. A lot of people holding out hope. As you saw, Mikhail Gorbachev, George Shultz, the two Cold War-era figures who helped broker that deal with Ronald Reagan, just wrote in the Washington Post, Connor, they want to give this one last go.
Yeah, and that's really the concern here, is that if they do not find a resolution between the United States and Russia, that we could be in a new arms race. The United States has concerns, obviously, about Russia's development of missiles, but they're also concerned about China's development. And China isn't a party to the INF Treaty. And Secretary Pompeo pointed to that today as one of the reasons why the U.S. is thinking about withdrawing, is moving towards withdrawal, because they believe that it gives China a military advantage over the United States. You know, that's an advantage that Russia has been taking advantage of by violating the treaty, by not being in compliance with it. But it now looks more and more likely that the U.S. will withdraw entirely to, close the gap on that missile development.
All right, Connor Finnegan for us at the State Department. Connor, thank you so much. Moving on now to China today, the president, just on the heels of the G20 summit, brokering a temporary ceasefire, Jordan, with China on these tariffs today, tweeted that he isn't quite over this tariff infatuation that he has.
That's right, Devin. He said that, reminder, if this doesn't work out, I am the tariff man. Now, I should point out that this phrase has really taken off on Twitter. It's been parodied a lot. My personal favorite, David, is someone who put it into the nursery rhyme, the Muffin Man, saying, "Do you know the tariff man who lives at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue?"
He's branding himself the tariff man. That is actually spooking the markets right now. If we take a live look, immediately after the G20 summit and the dinner with President Xi, the markets went up. They thought, wow, we could actually have some sort of a deal on tariffs. And now today, maybe because of those tweets, they are spooked. And as you can see there, the Dow is now down over 700 points, tumbling into the close here in the next half hour or so. For a little bit more on the impact the president's tariff policy and the tariff man, if you will, is having on the U.S. economy, I want to bring in John Murphy. He's with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Vice President of International Trade and Investment Policy. John, thank you so much for coming in here on ABC News Live. I've got to ask you, you guys put out a statement of optimism after the dinner with President Xi. You don't like tariffs, generally speaking, in the business community. What if there isn't a deal in 90 days now? How concerned are you, and what's at stake?
Well, we were pleased after the G20 that there's a deal on at least 3 points. One, first of all, the scheduled tariff increase on $200 billion worth of imports from China has been deferred. Those were set to go up on January 1st from 10% to 25%. That's been pushed off down towards approximately March 1st. And so we're entering into now, the second element is 90 days of negotiations with the Chinese. Up till now, there's been a lot of feeling out, exploring of positions, but now these negotiations are going to be more serious because of the third point, which is that the administration has put Bob Lighthizer, the U.S. Trade Representative, clearly in charge of the negotiations. So we're pleased to see the application of these higher tariffs deferred, but there's a lot of work ahead of us.
And John, the business community has also chafed. Well, you don't like tariffs generally. You've also chafed at the Chinese behavior, the theft of intellectual property, the forced transfer of technology, some of the things that President Trump is sort of going to bat for, if you will, with these tariffs. What's the alternative? If his tariff approach doesn't work, is there something that you think the administration needs to be doing to support the business community on those other issues?
Right. We agree with the administration on the diagnosis that China's theft of intellectual property and forced technology transfers are a serious problem, but we don't agree on the prescription. We think trade works and tariffs don't. Tariffs are a tax paid by American families and American businesses. What we'd rather see is more cooperation with our allies around the world. Right now, though, we're having a tariff war that doesn't apply just to China. We've put tariffs on Canada, Europe, Japan, many of our closest allies, on at least steel and aluminum, but some other products as well. Instead of going to trade war on many fronts, we should drop those tariffs and instead work with our allies to form a common front to confront the Chinese trade practices and use the negotiations that are now revving up as an opportunity to address our substantive issues with the Chinese.
And for the average person watching us and listening to you today, John, maybe a small business owner out there, maybe someone in a Fortune 500 company, again, just to go back to the seriousness of the next 90 days, Bob Lighthizer, a heavy hitter going into these negotiations. What is at stake? Do you see this as a very serious juncture, this period? Could this make things significantly worse if they don't reach a deal in 90 days?
Well, I think so, and I think you're seeing that in the market today. If you look at share prices for a lot of industrial companies and raw materials goods, they've been under serious stress for some time. And you're looking at capital expenditures data. Some of the numbers have really been softening recently. There's a great deal of nervousness out there about what these tariffs have meant. The cost of steel in the United States is up about 40% since the beginning of the year because of these tariffs. And manufacturers that depend on those steel imports, on steel generally, are paying so much more. Companies such as GM and Ford have paid as much as $1 billion more because of those higher prices. That's why we're urging that these tariffs not be used going forward. In particular, we've been pushing for the tariffs on Canada and Mexico to be dropped. There was a commitment that that would happen when the new NAFTA deal was struck. It hasn't, though, and it needs to happen immediately. I think there's a lot of companies and farmers and people across the country who would benefit if we were to drop those tariffs now.
All right, John Murphy with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Thank you so much for coming in, John, sharing your views. Appreciate it very much. Hope you'll come back. And Jordan, you know, being down in the G20, we know that the president likes these tariffs. He's sort of banking on the fact that the U.S. economy is doing so well generally right now, could sort of absorb a little bit of this punch, if you will, that John was talking about. But if things start to turn south, the market's certainly spooking people a little bit. He may have no choice but to back off some of these threats.
Definitely, Devin. And the president is very cognizant about that. Remember, this is a businessman president. He wants the economy to succeed. And so we will see the president back off if he needs to here. But right now, Devin, I think politically the president has made this risk of maybe counting his chickens before they've hatched. Here, they're really celebrating this deal as if it's already a done deal. And the truth is that it's just not. We've seen the Chinese go into negotiations before and back out. So we'll see what they are able to produce in 90 days.
And a lot of ambiguous statements on Twitter and the like. One of them, the president says China is going to buy more agricultural goods. We don't know which those are or how much they are, but you will track it for us from the White House, no doubt. But all eyes tomorrow, of course, turning to the final day of President George Herbert Walker Bush. Funeral ceremonies here in Washington will be up at the National Cathedral tomorrow, where the president will be celebrated by dignitaries from around the world, including all former living presidents. And by the way, we should note that this will be the first time that President Trump, President Obama, President Bush, all of them will be together in the same room. It's going to be quite something. Tomorrow, that coverage will begin right here on ABC News Live at 9:45 a.m. Eastern Time, running into the afternoon. We'll have full commercial-free, uninterrupted coverage here. You can watch us on Apple TV, Hulu, Roku, or your mobile device. Download the ABC News app. Follow us on the go. We'll have all those pictures for you to follow that coverage tomorrow. And, of course, a complete wrap-up tonight of all of today's events here on ABC News Live at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. World News Prime will run all of that again. Jordan and I will be back here tomorrow at 3:30 Eastern Time in the briefing room. Until then, thanks so much for watching. Have a good night.